It was supposed to be a quick hike. On the morning of October 17, 2006, 12-year-old Peter Kellog set off into the dense, fog-laden woods behind his family's rural home in Gideon, Montana. His mother, Cynthia Kellog, had seen him last at around 8:30 a.m., wearing his favorite blue hoodie and cargo pants, his backpack slung over his shoulder. Peter often ventured into the woods. He loved nature, always talking about the birds, the strange carvings on tree trunks, and the old abandoned cabin deeper in. But this time, he never came back. By sunset, panic set in. His mother called out his name, her voice echoing through the trees. By nightfall, a search party had gathered, flashlights slicing through the darkness, dogs barking in the cold air. But there was no trace of Peter. Not a single footprint. Not a single clue. 2 days later, searchers found something strange. About a mile from the Kellog home, deep in the forest, a search dog sniffed out Peter's backpack resting neatly on a rock near a shallow creek. The oddest part? The bag was completely dry, even though it had rained the night before. Inside were Peter's belongings: a water bottle, a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a notebook. The last page contained a chilling note in Peter's handwriting. "If you find this, tell Mom I'm okay. I had to go with him." The note sent shockwaves through the community. Who was Peter talking about? A friend? A stranger? Or something else entirely? Peter wasn't the type to run away. His best friend, Sydney Clemency, swore that Peter had been acting normal except for one weird thing. "He told me he'd been seeing someone in the woods," Sydney revealed. "A man, or maybe a shadow. He wasn't sure. He said it would just stand there, watching." The police weren't sure what to believe. Then, a local hunter came forward with a horrifying claim. 3 days before Peter vanished, Gideon Marshall, a retired game hunter, had been tracking deer through the same woods. As he set up his trail camera near the creek, he saw something deeply unsettling: a tall figure standing between the trees, too still to be human. It wasn't moving, Gideon recalled, his voice shaking. Not even breathing. Just watching. And when I looked away for 1 second, it was gone. Authorities reviewed Gideon's trail cam footage. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. In the background of the last photo, just behind a tree, stood a tall, pale figure with sunken eyes. It was watching. And it was right where Peter's backpack had been found. A week after Peter's disappearance, Cynthia received a call from an unknown number. She answered, her voice trembling. At first, there was just static. Then, a whisper. "Mom, it's me." The line went dead. Cynthia screamed, dialing the number back, but it was disconnected. Peter was out there. Somewhere. But the question was he still Peter? The phone call left Cynthia Kellog shaken. Her son was alive somewhere. But why had his voice sounded so distant? And who was he with? The police traced the call, but it led to a disconnected landline, one registered to an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. A cabin that had been empty for over 50 years. That night, Sydney Clemency couldn't sleep. Peter had told her about an old cabin before he disappeared. Could that be where he was? At midnight, she made a reckless decision. Armed with only a flashlight and a kitchen knife, she sneaked out of her house and headed into the forest. The trees seemed too quiet. No wind. No crickets. Just a heavy, unnatural silence. Then, a branch broke behind her. Sydney spun around, her flashlight flickering. No one was there. At least, no one she could see. Sydney finally reached the clearing where the abandoned cabin stood. Its wood was warped with age, the door slightly open, as if waiting. She stepped inside. The air smelled of rotting wood and something foul. Then, her light caught something on the far wall. Carvings. Names. Peter's name was there, scratched deep into the wood. And underneath it was a chilling message. He chose to stay. A noise came from the corner. Slow, labored breathing. Sydney's heart pounded. She raised her flashlight. And her scream never left her throat. Because crouched in the darkness was Peter. His hoodie was torn, his face pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Sydney," he whispered. "You shouldn't be here." Her hands shook. "Peter, what happened to you?" Who's with you? Peter's lips trembled. He looked past her, as if something was behind her. He doesn't like when people come looking, Peter whispered. You have to go. Now. Sydney turned. And for a split second, in the reflection of her flashlight beam, she saw a shadow with sunken eyes standing right behind her. Then, the light went out. The flashlight died, plunging Sydney into complete darkness. Cold air brushed against her neck. Something was there. Watching. Waiting. Peter grabbed her wrist. His grip was ice cold. Run. Sydney didn't hesitate. She bolted for the door, dragging Peter behind her. But as soon as they reached the threshold, he stopped. I can't leave. Sydney spun around. What? Peter, we have to go. His face was twisted in pain, his feet planted firmly on the rotting floorboards. It was as if something was holding him back. Then a whisper filled the air. Not Peter's. Not hers. Something older. He belongs to us now. Sydney barely had time to react before a hand, thin, pale, and impossibly long, lunged from the shadows, grabbing Peter's shoulder. Peter didn't scream. He just looked at Sydney with wide, empty eyes and whispered, "Tell Mom I'm sorry." The cabin shook. The walls seemed to close in. And then, Peter was gone. Sydney stumbled back, gasping. The air felt wrong. The shadows shifted unnaturally. The door slammed shut, nearly crushing her. And the last thing she heard before she ran, before she never looked back, was the sound of Peter's voice. But it wasn't coming from him anymore. It was coming from the thing in the dark. Don't come looking for me again. 3 days later, Cynthia Kellog received another call from the same unknown number. This time, she let it go to voicemail. She pressed play. The message was just static at first. Then, "Mom, it's me." The voice was Peter's. But there was something wrong. He spoke too slowly. The words were distorted, stretched, like a voice trying to remember how to sound human. "I'm okay now. Don't look for me." The call ended. Cynthia clutched the phone to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to believe he was safe. But deep down, she knew. Whatever was speaking through that phone, it wasn't her son anymore.